When a wealthy widowed CEO witnesses a compassionate waiter giving a warm blanket and hot soup to a shivering little girl, she never expected her frozen heart would melt. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from and subscribe for more touching stories. The harsh Detroit winter wind cut through Marcus Thompson's warm jacket as he stepped out of Harrison Industries at 11:47 p.m. His hands, still stained with grease from 16 grueling hours on the factory floor, trembled as he pulled his phone from his pocket. The screen displayed another medical bill notification, $80,000 and counting. His mother's cancer treatment had drained everything, and even though she'd passed 3 months ago, the debt followed him like a shadow. Marcus walked slowly down the empty sidewalk, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. The city felt abandoned at this hour, with only scattered streetlights illuminating the snow-covered pavement. He was thinking about tomorrow's double shift when he heard it, a soft whimper coming from the alley beside Murphy's Diner. There, huddled against a dumpster, sat a small figure wrapped in newspaper. As Marcus approached, he saw her clearly, a little girl no more than 6 years old, with tangled dark hair and clothes that had seen better days. Her lips were blue from the cold, and her small body shook uncontrollably. "Hey there, sweetheart," Marcus said gently, crouching down to her level. "What's your name?" The girl looked up with large, frightened eyes. "Lily," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Marcus's heart shattered. Without hesitation, he unwrapped the only blanket he owned, the one he'd been saving for his own cold apartment, and wrapped it around Lily's tiny shoulders. "Are you hungry, Lily?" She nodded weakly. Marcus checked his wallet. $15, his grocery money for the week. But looking at this child's hollow cheeks, the choice was obvious. "Come on," he said, lifting her gently. "Let's get you some hot soup." 3 blocks away, Victoria Sterling sat in the back seat of her black Mercedes, reviewing contracts with her business advisor, Richard Cross. At 28, she controlled a billion-dollar empire inherited from her late husband, but tonight, she felt the weight of impossible decisions. "The Harrison Industries deal will generate tremendous profits," Richard insisted, his pale eyes gleaming with greed. "Those factory jobs are obsolete anyway. The development will bring progress to Detroit." Victoria stared at the documents. 2,000 families would lose their livelihoods. "Richard, these people have worked there for generations. We can't." "Just, Victoria, sentiment doesn't pay shareholders," Richard interrupted coldly. As their car stopped at a red light, Victoria glanced out the window. Across the street, she saw something that made her breath catch. A young man in work clothes, carefully feeding soup to a small girl in a diner booth. A man's face was kind, patient, as he wiped the child's tears with his napkin. In that moment, watching this stranger's selfless act, Victoria felt something stir in her chest, a reminder of the person she used to be before money and power complicated everything. "Stop the car," she whispered. "What?" Richard asked. "I said stop the car." Victoria's voice was firm now. "I'm not signing those papers. Find another way, one that doesn't destroy families." Richard's face darkened with rage, but he forced a smile. "Of course, Victoria. Whatever you think is best." As the Mercedes pulled away, Richard's mind was already racing with plans for revenge. He'd lost millions in secret commissions tonight, and someone would pay for that mistake. Inside the warm diner, Marcus watched Lily eat her second bowl of soup, unaware that his simple act of kindness had just saved 2,000 jobs and set in motion events that would change all their lives forever. What happens next will shock you. Will this mysterious connection between Marcus and Victoria lead to something beautiful, or will dark forces tear them apart? The next morning, Victoria Sterling couldn't shake the image of the kind stranger from her mind. She made a decision that would change everything. She would find him. Using her resources, she discovered the man's identity: Marcus Thompson, a factory worker drowning in medical debt. But what she found next horrified her. Through private investigators, Victoria learned that little Lily had escaped from Tommy Rodriguez, her negligent guardian who forced her to beg on the streets while he spent her earnings on alcohol and gambling. Tommy worked for his cousin Diego Rodriguez, a ruthless businessman who controlled Detroit's underground economy through intimidation and corruption. When Marcus brought Lily to Detroit General Hospital the next day, concerned about her persistent cough and malnourishment, Tommy received word from his street contacts. The scrawny man with yellowed teeth burst into the hospital lobby, reeking of cheap whiskey. "Where's my kid?" Tommy demanded at the reception desk, his voice slurred but threatening. Marcus stepped protectively in front of Lily's hospital room door. "She's not going anywhere with you. Look at her condition. She's sick because of your neglect." "You don't know who you're messing with," Tommy snarled, pulling out his phone. "My cousin Diego owns half this city. You're just some factory rat." Meanwhile, Richard Cross sat in his expensive office, fury consuming him over the lost Harrison Industries deal. The canceled sale had cost him $3 million in secret commissions, money he'd already promised to dangerous people. He needed Victoria to suffer, and he'd found the perfect weapon. Richard contacted Jake Sullivan, a former military man struggling with PTSD and crushing debt from his daughter's medical treatments. Jake was desperate, honorable, but broken, making him the ideal pawn. "There's a man named Marcus Thompson," Richard explained over coffee, sliding a thick envelope across the table. "He's trying to extort money from Mrs. Sterling by using a sick child as bait. I need you to convince him to back off for her protection." Jake's weathered face showed conflict. "I don't hurt innocent people." "He's not innocent," Richard lied smoothly. "He's a predator targeting a grieving widow. This money could solve your daughter's medical problems." That evening, Marcus left the hospital after ensuring Lily was safe in protective custody. As he walked to his rusted pickup truck, a shadow emerged from behind a pillar. Jake Sullivan stepped forward, his military bearing evident despite his worn clothes. "Marcus Thompson?" Jake's voice was controlled but threatening. "Yeah, who's asking?" "Someone who knows about your game with Victoria Sterling. Stay away from her, or you'll regret it." Marcus's confusion was genuine. "I don't know what you're talking about. I've never even met. Don't lie to me." Jake's voice cracked like a whip. "I know desperation when I see it, and I won't let you exploit a good woman." As Jake disappeared into the night, Marcus stood alone in the parking garage, his mind racing. Someone was watching him, and they knew about his connection to the mysterious woman in the Mercedes. But who was Victoria Sterling, and why did helping one little girl suddenly make him a target? Back in her penthouse, Victoria stared at Marcus's file, unaware that her interest in this good man had just painted a target on his back. Richard's plan was already in motion, and the web of lies was tightening around them all. The danger is escalating, and Marcus has no idea what's coming for him. Will Victoria realize her investigation has put him in jeopardy before it's too late? The tension reached a breaking point the following afternoon when Diego Rodriguez himself arrived at Detroit General Hospital. Unlike his cousin Tommy, Diego commanded respect through fear. Dressed in an expensive suit, his cold eyes and calculating demeanor made even the security guards nervous. "I'm here for Lily Rodriguez," Diego announced at the reception desk, sliding a crisp business card across the counter. "Family emergency." The young nurse's hands trembled as she recognized the name. Everyone in Detroit knew Diego Rodriguez, legitimate businessman by day, something far more dangerous by night. "Sir, the child is under protective custody." "I'll need to call." "No need for complications," Diego interrupted, placing a thick envelope on the counter. I think we can resolve this quietly. Marcus had been visiting Lily when the commotion started. Through the window, he saw Diego's intimidating presence and the nurse's obvious distress. Without hesitation, he stepped into the hallway. "She's not going anywhere," Marcus declared, positioning himself between Diego and the corridor leading to Lily's room. Diego's lips curved into a cold smile. "And you are?" "Someone who actually cares about that little girl's welfare." The hospital security guard, an elderly man named Frank, approached nervously. The stress of the confrontation, combined with his heart condition, proved too much. Frank clutched his chest and collapsed, gasping for air as his face turned gray. "Someone call 911. A nurse screamed as chaos erupted in the confusion. Diego shoved Marcus hard against the wall. "You have no idea what you're interfering with," he hissed. Marcus's head struck the concrete with a sickening crack. As he slumped to the floor, unconscious, blood began pooling beneath him. Lily's terrified screams echoed from her room. Victoria Sterling arrived just as paramedics were loading the security guard into an ambulance. She'd come to check on the child she'd heard about, but instead found a war zone. Seeing Marcus unconscious and bleeding, she immediately called her personal physician and demanded the best neurological team. "Ma'am, you can't just..." a hospital administrator began. "I'm paying for everything." Victoria cut him off, her voice sharp with authority. "Get him the best care available. Now." From across the parking lot, Jake Sullivan watched through binoculars, his stomach churning with realization. This wasn't a con man exploiting a widow. This was a good man protecting a child. Richard Cross had lied to him, and Jake had been threatening an innocent person. A local news crews arrived within hours, turning the incident into a media circus. "Billionaire widow involved in hospital brawl" became the evening's headline. Victoria's pristine reputation took its first major hit at the Harrison Industries factory. Workers gathered around radios and phones, listening to the unfolding story. Rumors spread quickly. Some said Marcus had sold them out. Others whispered that Victoria Sterling was using their friend for publicity. "Marcus wouldn't hurt a fly," defended Sarah Martinez, a longtime co-worker. "But why is he mixed up with billionaires? Nothing good comes from that world." Richard Cross watched the news coverage from his office, a satisfied smile playing across his lips. The first phase of his plan was working perfectly. Victoria's reputation was cracking, Marcus was hospitalized, and public opinion was turning against them both. But Richard had underestimated one factor: Jake Sullivan's conscience. That night, Jake made a decision that would change everything. He began investigating Richard Cross, determined to uncover the truth about the man who had turned him into a weapon against innocent people. As Marcus lay unconscious in the ICU, Victoria sat beside his bed, holding his hand. She didn't know his name, his story, or why she felt so connected to this stranger. All she knew was that his act of kindness had inspired her to be better, and now he was suffering because of her world's corruption. Marcus's life hangs in the balance, and the conspiracy against them is just beginning. Will he survive? And will Victoria realize the danger she's brought into his life? 3 days later, Marcus Thompson awoke to a nightmare he never could have imagined. The sterile white ceiling of the hospital room came into focus slowly, but when he tried to move his legs, nothing happened. Dr. Patricia Williams, the head neurologist, delivered the devastating news with professional compassion. The impact caused severe spinal trauma, Marcus. There's significant swelling around the L2 vertebrae. We won't know for several weeks if the paralysis is permanent. Marcus stared at his motionless legs beneath the hospital blanket, his world crumbling. "I can't feel anything," he whispered. His voice breaking. Victoria had been maintaining a bedside vigil, but Marcus's reaction when he saw her was not what she expected. His face twisted with anguish and anger. "Get out," he said quietly. "Marcus, I'm here to help." "Get out." His voice exploded with pain. "You don't belong here. I was fine before you and your rich friends showed up. Now look at me." He gestured helplessly at his paralyzed legs. "I'm nothing, a burden. Go back to your mansion and forget the charity case." Victoria's eyes filled with tears, but she refused to leave. "I won't abandon you." "You're not abandoning me," Marcus said bitterly. "You're just stopping playing God with poor people's lives. You don't understand what it's like to have nothing, to lose everything twice." Meanwhile, Victoria faced her own devastating crisis. Richard Cross had moved swiftly while she was distracted at the hospital. Using her emotional state and the negative media coverage, he convinced 3 board members to support a competency hearing. "Victoria's behavior has become erratic," Richard explained to the Sterling Corporation board, "involving herself in street violence, making impulsive financial decisions. The shareholders are concerned." Dr. Edmund Hayes, a psychiatrist Richard had carefully selected and generously compensated, presented his evaluation of Victoria. "Mrs. Sterling shows signs of severe emotional instability, possibly triggered by unresolved grief from her husband's death. She's making dangerous decisions that could destroy the company." The legal proceedings moved with frightening speed. Within a week, Victoria found herself declared temporarily incompetent. With Richard appointed as interim CEO, her access to company funds was frozen, her security detail dismissed, and her movements restricted. But the cruelest blow came when Diego Rodriguez made his move. Using his connections in Detroit's corrupt social services department, he arranged for Lily to be transferred from protective custody to Riverside State Children's Home, an overcrowded, understaffed facility where children often disappeared. Into the system's cracks, Lily, already traumatized by the hospital violence, now found herself in a cold dormitory with 30 other forgotten children. She stopped speaking entirely, retreating into herself as the world seemed determined to break her spirit. Jake Sullivan, consumed by guilt over his role in Marcus's injury, tried to investigate Richard Cross but found himself trapped. Richard had anticipated this possibility and planted evidence in Jake's apartment, falsified documents suggesting Jake had been embezzling money from various employers. "You're in no position to cause trouble," Richard warned Jake during a tense phone call. "One word from me, and you'll be in prison while your daughter dies waiting for medical treatment you can't provide from a cell." Marcus, alone in his hospital bed, stared at the ceiling and contemplated the wreckage of his life. No job, no home, crushing debt, and now paralyzed, possibly forever. The factory workers who once respected him now whispered that he'd somehow sold them out to the rich woman. Victoria, confined to a luxury psychiatric facility, was kept heavily sedated while Richard systematically dismantled everything she'd tried to protect. The Harrison Industries sale went through, and 2,000 families received their termination notices. As snow began falling outside the hospital window, Marcus made a decision that would haunt him. When Victoria tried to visit again, he had. The nurses turned her away. "Tell her I don't want to see her again," he said, his heart breaking even as he spoke the words. "Tell her she deserves better than being tied to a broken man." All 3 lives are spiraling into darkness, and Richard's plan is succeeding beyond his wildest dreams. Can they find their way back to each other before it's too late? The restraining order arrived on a cold Tuesday morning. Richard Cross had successfully convinced a judge that Victoria's obsession with Marcus Thompson posed a danger to both of them. Victoria was now legally forbidden from contacting Marcus or visiting the hospital. "This is for your own protection," Dr. Hayes explained as orderlies escorted Victoria from the psychiatric facility's visiting room. "Your fixation on this man is preventing your recovery." Marcus, unaware of the legal machinations, interpreted. Victoria's sudden absence as confirmation of his worst fears. She'd grown tired of the broken factory worker and moved on to more interesting charitable causes. The nurses, bound by the court order, couldn't explain the real reason for her disappearance. At Sterling Corporation, Richard wasted no time implementing his vision. The Harrison Industries factory closure proceeded immediately, and Marcus received his termination notice while still in his hospital bed. 2,000 families faced unemployment just before Christmas. Efficiency demands difficult decisions. Richard announced to the board, "Sentiment has no place in modern business." Marcus's former co-workers gathered outside the factory gates, their faces etched with betrayal and confusion. Rumors swirled that Marcus had somehow orchestrated the closure in exchange for money from Victoria Sterling. 20 years I worked beside him, muttered Bill Harrison, the plant foreman. Never thought he'd sell us out for some rich woman's attention. Marcus returned to his trailer park in a wheelchair, facing a stack of eviction notices and medical bills. His disability. Payments wouldn't cover even half his expenses. Neighbors who once waved friendly greetings now crossed the street to avoid him. Meanwhile, Lily's situation at Riverside State Children's Home deteriorated rapidly. The facility was a bureaucratic nightmare where children were processed like inventory. Lily, already traumatized into selective mutism, was placed in the difficult cases ward with minimal supervision. Social worker Janet Murphy, overworked and underpaid, barely glanced at Lily's file. "Another street kid," she muttered, stamping the paperwork. "Probably better off here than wherever she came from." Lily stopped eating regularly, lost weight, and spent hours staring out barred windows, waiting for Marcus or the kind lady who'd visited the hospital to rescue her. But no one came. Diego Rodriguez leveraged his connections to ensure Lily remained forgotten in the system. His contact in social services, Patricia Vance, was happy to accept monthly payments to keep certain files buried. "The kid's a ghost now," Diego told Tommy with satisfaction. "No one's looking for ghosts." Jake Sullivan, paralyzed by Richard's blackmail, watched helplessly as the people he'd wronged suffered. His daughter's medical treatments continued, paid for with blood money, while Marcus struggled alone in poverty. Victoria, heavily medicated and isolated, could only watch through her facility window as snow covered Detroit. She'd tried to save. One man's kindness, and instead had destroyed 3 lives. Richard visited weekly, updating her on Marcus's deteriorating condition with cruel pleasure. "He's lost everything," Richard smiled. "Job, home, hope. All because you couldn't leave well. Enough alone." As winter deepened, 3 broken souls faced their darkest hour, unaware that their greatest trials still lay ahead. The web of destruction is complete, but sometimes rock bottom is where miracles begin. Will anyone escape Richard's trap? 6 months after the hospital incident, Richard Cross achieved his ultimate victory with falsified psychiatric evaluations and testimony from bribed witnesses. He convinced the court that Victoria Sterling was permanently mentally incompetent. The gavel fell with devastating finality. Given Mrs. Sterling's continued deterioration and inability to manage her affairs, Judge Morrison announced, "Full guardianship is awarded to Mr. Richard Cross." Victoria, heavily sedated in the courtroom, could barely comprehend what was happening. Her empire, built by her late husband's blood and sweat, now belonged to the man who had orchestrated her downfall. Richard's first act as guardian was selling Harrison Industries to Blackstone Development Corporation for triple the original offer. The factory was demolished within weeks, erasing 70 years of Detroit's industrial history. The 2,000 workers who depended on those jobs scattered like leaves in the wind. Marcus watched the demolition from his wheelchair outside the convenience store, where he now worked part-time for minimum wage. The sight of the wrecking ball destroying his former workplace felt like watching his own funeral. "Should have seen this coming," he muttered to himself, counting the meager tips from his shift. Even this job was charity from his former supervisor's brother, who felt sorry for the cripple who got mixed up with rich folks. The eviction notice on his trailer was final. In 3 days, Marcus would be homeless. His medical bills had mounted to over $200,000, and bankruptcy loomed like a death sentence for any remaining dignity he possessed. But Marcus's troubles were nothing compared to what Diego Rodriguez had planned. One evening, as Marcus wheeled himself home from work, a black van pulled alongside him. Before he could react, strong hands grabbed him, and a cloth soaked in chloroform covered his face. "Diego sends his regards," was the last thing Marcus heard. Before consciousness faded, Jake Sullivan, who'd been following Marcus out of guilt and protectiveness, witnessed the kidnapping. When he tried to intervene, Diego's men overpowered him too. Both men disappeared into Detroit's criminal underworld. Marcus awakened in a basement that reeked of mold and desperation. His wheelchair was gone, leaving him helpless on a dirty mattress. Jake lay unconscious nearby, blood trickling from a head wound. "Welcome to your new home," Diego smiled, descending the stairs. "You cost me a lot of trouble, factory boy. Time to pay the price." At Riverside Children's Home, Lily's condition had worsened dramatically. Malnourished and forgotten, she'd been transferred to the facility's psychiatric wing after a social worker found her talking to imaginary friends, Marcus and Victoria, who lived only in her traumatized mind. The child shows signs of severe dissociation, Dr. Peterson noted in her file. Recommend increased isolation and medication. Victoria, meanwhile, existed in a pharmaceutical haze at Whitmore Psychiatric Hospital. Richard had her moved to the secure wing, where she was kept unconscious most days and confused the rest. Her fortune funded Richard's lavish lifestyle while she withered away. On a snowy December evening, Richard visited Victoria's room carrying champagne. She lay motionless, staring at nothing, drool running down her chin. "I thought you'd like to." "No," Richard said cheerfully. "Your factory friend is officially missing. Probably found frozen in an alley somewhere. Such a shame how your little charity project ended." Victoria's eyes flickered with recognition and pain, but the medications kept her trapped in her own body, unable to speak or move. All three protagonists have reached absolute rock bottom. In the depths of despair, will anyone find the strength to fight back? 3 months into their captivity, Marcus and Jake existed in a hell beyond imagination. Diego's basement had become their tomb, a concrete cage where hope came to die. Marcus, unable to use his legs, was completely dependent on his captors for basic needs. They provided just enough food and water to keep him alive, but nothing more. "Why are you keeping us alive?" Marcus asked Diego during one of his cruel visits. Diego's smile was ice cold, because death would be mercy. "I want you to suffer like I suffered when you interfered with my business. Every day you wake up is another day of payment." Jake, racked with guilt, tried to care for Marcus despite his own injuries. "This is my fault," he whispered during the long, dark nights. "I should have seen through Richard's lies." "Don't," Marcus replied weakly. "We're both victims here." At Whitmore Psychiatric Hospital, Victoria fought a different kind of battle. The medications Dr. Hayes prescribed kept her in a zombie-like state, but during brief moments of clarity, she planned. She'd learned to hide pills under her tongue, spitting them out when the nurses left. Richard's weekly visits had become torture, sessions where he detailed every aspect of his victory. "Your precious factory worker has been missing for months." He gloated. "The police assume he's dead. No one's looking for a crippled nobody. And that little girl you were so concerned about? She's lost in the system, probably being abused in some overcrowded facility. All because you tried to play savior." Victoria's hands trembled with rage, but she forced herself to remain still, to appear sedated. she needed Richard to underestimate. Her dot at Riverside Children's Home. Lily had been moved to solitary confinement after social workers deemed her uncontrollable. At 6 years old, she'd learned that crying brought no comfort, that screaming brought punishment, and that hoping brought only deeper pain. She'd stopped talking entirely, existing in a world where Marcus and Victoria lived only in her memories. She drew pictures of them on scraps of paper with stolen pencils. The kind man who'd given her soup, the pretty lady who'd held her hand at the hospital. Persistent delusional behavior, her file read. Recommend indefinite psychological hold. Dr. Peterson, the facility's psychiatrist, increased Lily's medication dosage. Sometimes we have to break them completely before we can rebuild them. She explained to the staff. Jake Sullivan's daughter Emma was dying. The medical treatments Richard had paid for were no longer enough, and Jake's capture meant no more money for experimental procedures. She lay in her hospital bed, asking nurses when her daddy would visit. "He's away on business, sweetheart," the nurses lied. Not knowing Jake was chained in a basement across town, Richard Cross lived like a king in Victoria's penthouse, hosting lavish parties with money stolen from her accounts. He'd convinced Detroit's elite that Victoria had suffered a complete mental breakdown, making himself appear as the reluctant but responsible guardian. Such a tragedy, he'd tell guests. She was never the same after Daniel's death. Sometimes the wealthy are the most fragile of all. As winter deepened into its cruelest months, 3 innocent souls clung to life in their separate prisons. Marcus fought infection from untreated wounds. Victoria battled pharmaceutical chains, and Lily withered in institutional neglect. But in the darkest hour, when all seemed lost, the first spark of resistance began to glow. Dr. Sarah Chun, anew, psychiatrist at Whitmore Hospital, noticed something troubling in Victoria's medical files. The tide is about to turn, but will it be too late to save them all? Dr. Sarah Chun had seen enough psychiatric abuse to recognize the signs. Victoria Sterling's medication dosages were dangerously high, far exceeding any reasonable treatment protocol. As the new head psychiatrist at Whitmore Hospital, Sarah began her own investigation. "These prescriptions don't match the symptoms," she told her assistant while reviewing Victoria's file. "Someone's keeping her chemically restrained, not treating her." Sarah discreetly reduced Victoria's medication, telling the nursing staff it was a gradual transition to new treatments. Within days, Victoria's clarity began returning like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. "Can you hear me, Mrs. Sterling?" Sarah whispered during a late evening visit. Victoria's eyes focused for the first time in months. "Help me," she managed to whisper. Meanwhile, at Riverside Children's Home, Maria Santos had just started working as a night shift nurse. A mother of 3 herself, Maria was horrified by the conditions she witnessed. Children medicated into, submission, basic needs ignored, and case files deliberately misplaced. Lily caught Maria's attention immediately. The tiny girl sat motionless in her isolation room, staring at crude drawings she'd made with smuggled crayons, pictures of a man in a wheelchair and a woman with kind eyes. "Mia, what are these?" Maria asked gently, sitting beside Lily. The first time in months, Lily looked up. She pointed to the drawing of Marcus. "He saved me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "They took him away." Maria felt her heart break. This wasn't mental illness. This was trauma from separation and abuse. She began documenting everything she witnessed, building a case that would eventually reach the state authorities. Detective Robert Nash had known Marcus Thompson since childhood. They'd grown up 3 trailers apart, played baseball together, and remained friends despite taking different paths. When Marcus's disappearance was reported, most cops assumed he'd skipped town to avoid debt. But Robert knew better. Marcus wouldn't just vanish, Robert told his partner. Guys got more integrity than half the force. Robert's investigation led him to Tommy Rodriguez, Diego's cousin. After 2 hours of interrogation, Tommy broke under pressure, terrified of spending life in prison for kidnapping charges. Diego's got them in the warehouse on Cass Avenue, Tommy sobbed. Basement level. But he's got cops on payroll. You can't trust anyone. Robert assembled a team of officers he knew were clean, but he needed more than muscle. He needed someone who understood Diego's operation from the inside. That someone turned out to be Jake Sullivan's former military contact, Sergeant Mike Torres. Torres had been tracking Jake's disappearance through unofficial channels, using his special forces connections to gather intelligence. Jake's a good man who got played, Torres explained to Robert. If he's with your friend, they're both in serious danger. The rescue operation required perfect timing. Diego had informants throughout the police department, including Detective Frank Morrison, who'd been feeding information to Richard Cross for months. But Richard had made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated Dr. Sarah Chun's determination to expose medical abuse. Sarah had contacted the FBI's healthcare fraud division, providing evidence of the conspiracy to keep Victoria illegally sedated. Agent Lisa Park, specializing in elder abuse cases, saw the bigger picture immediately. This isn't just medical malpractice, she told Sarah. This is kidnapping, fraud, and conspiracy. We're talking federal charges. As separate investigations converged, the web Richard had woven so carefully began showing cracks. Victoria's returning clarity, Lily's testimony through Maria, and Detective Nash's determination created a perfect storm. But time was running out. In Diego's basement, Marcus was developing pneumonia from the damp conditions, and Jake's untreated. Injuries were becoming infected. They needed rescue soon, or the reunion would happen in a morgue. The stage was set for a desperate race against time, with unlikely heroes emerging from the shadows. Justice is finally stirring, but will it arrive before Diego silences his prisoners forever? The rescue operation began at 3 a.m. on a frigid Tuesday morning. Detective Robert Nash, Sergeant Mike Torres, and 6 carefully selected officers surrounded the Cass Avenue warehouse. But Diego Rodriguez had been in this game too long to be caught. Unprepared, Detective Frank Morrison, Richard's corrupt contact within the police force, had tipped off Diego hours earlier. When the raid team breached the basement door, they found empty chains and a lingering smell of fear, but no prisoners. They moved them, Torres cursed, examining the abandoned basement. Probably had a backup location ready. But Diego had made a critical error in his haste. Jake Sullivan, weakened but determined, had managed to scratch a message into the concrete wall before being moved. RF-47, the initials of Richard's shell company and the number of the warehouse where they were likely headed. Meanwhile, at Whitmore Psychiatric Hospital, Dr. Sarah Chun had been secretly recording her conversations with Victoria. With her mind clearing from the reduced medication, Victoria revealed shocking truths about her husband Daniel's death. "Richard killed him," Victoria whispered, gripping Sarah's hand with surprising strength. Daniel discovered Richard was embezzling from our charity foundation. The car accident wasn't random. Richard sabotaged the brakes. Sarah's hidden recorder captured every word as Victoria continued. Richard thought I was too naive to notice the missing money, but Daniel had been building a case. The night he died, Daniel was driving to meet with the FBI, but their secret meetings hadn't gone unnoticed. Richard arrived for his weekly visit. Earlier than usual, finding Dr. Chun reviewing Victoria's file with suspicious intensity. Dr. Chun, Richard's voice was silk-hiding steel. How wonderful to see Victoria receiving such personal attention. "Mr. Cross," Sarah replied carefully. "I was just adjusting her treatment plan." Richard's eyes narrowed as he noticed Victoria. "Seemed more alert than usual. She appears different." I hope you're not reducing our medications without consulting me. As her guardian, I must approve all treatment changes. When Dr. Chon stepped out to get Victoria's chart, Richard moved quickly. He grabbed Victoria's arm roughly, his mask of civility finally slipping. You think you're clever, don't you? He hissed. Recording our conversations? Planning some pathetic comeback? Victoria met his gaze with newfound steel. I remember everything now, Richard, including what you did to Daniel. Richard's face contorted with rage. He lunged for the recording device he'd spotted hidden in Victoria's bedside table. In the struggle, he violently shoved Dr. Chun, who had returned to find him attacking her patient. Sarah fell hard against the metal bed frame, her head striking the corner with a sickening crack. Blood immediately began pooling beneath her unconscious form as Victoria screamed for help. You stupid woman! Richard snarled at Victoria. You've caused nothing but trouble from the beginning. Nurses rushed in to find Richard standing over Dr. Chun's motionless body, claiming Victoria had become violent and attacked the doctor. But one nurse, Elena Rodriguez, had heard the real commotion and witnessed Richard's assault. Security! Elena shouted. This man just attacked Dr. Chun. As hospital security restrained Richard, he made a desperate phone call to Diego. Clean everything up, he ordered. The whole operation is compromised. At the new warehouse location, Diego received Richard's warning just as police sirens began echoing in the distance. In his panic to escape, Diego made the fatal mistake of leaving behind crucial evidence, financial records linking him to Richard's conspiracy. Jake Sullivan, despite his injuries, managed one last heroic act. As Diego's men prepared to move, him and Marcus again, Jake broke free from his restraints and tackled the nearest guard, shouting for Marcus to activate the emergency beacon. Torres had taught him to build from scraps. The signal reached Torres just as he was coordinating the search of Richard's identified warehouse. Racing against time, the rescue team arrived to find Jake bloodied but victorious. Having recorded Diego's confession on a smuggled phone before the crime boss fled into the Detroit underground, the truth is finally emerging. But with Dr. Chun fighting for her life and Diego still free, the danger is far from over. Marcus Thompson lay in the hospital bed, his body ravaged by months of captivity, but his spirit somehow unbroken. The reunion with freedom felt surreal. Nurses bustling around him, clean sheets, and the promise of proper medical care. But even as his body began healing, his heart carried a weight that no medicine could cure. Dr. Jennifer Walsh delivered the news with gentle professionalism. The malnutrition and untreated infections had accelerated the spinal damage, Marcus. I'm afraid the paralysis is now permanent. I'm so sorry. Marcus closed his eyes, absorbing the finality of those words. In the bed beside him, Jake Sullivan was recovering from his own injuries, racked with guilt despite Marcus's repeated forgiveness. You saved us both, Marcus told Jake. Stop punishing yourself. But their rescue had come at a terrible price. Dr. Sarah Chun remained in a coma, her skull fractured from Richard's violent attack. The woman who'd risked everything to help Victoria now fought for her life because of her courage. Victoria, finally, free from her pharmaceutical prison, sat beside Sarah's bedside day and night. I'm so sorry, she whispered to the unconscious doctor. This is all my fault. If I hadn't involved Marcus in my world. The guilt was consuming her. 3 innocent people had suffered because she'd chosen to act on impulse, to follow her heart, instead of staying safely in her protected bubble of wealth. Meanwhile, Diego Rodriguez remained a shadow haunting Detroit's underworld. Though his warehouse operation was destroyed and several associates arrested, the man himself had vanished like smoke. But Diego wasn't finished with his revenge. From a burner phone in an abandoned building, Diego made his final play. He called Victoria directly, his voice cold as winter steel. You cost me everything, Mrs. Sterling. My business, my reputation, my family's safety. Now you pay the price. What do you want? Victoria asked, her voice steady despite her fear. Transfer 50 million to my offshore accounts, or your factory friend disappears forever. And this time, there won't be any dramatic rescues. Victoria's blood ran cold. He's in the hospital under police protection. You can't I? Diego's laugh was bitter. I have friends everywhere, Mrs. Sterling. Guards can be bribed. Doctors can be threatened. Accidents happen in hospitals all the time. Victoria looked through the hospital window at Marcus, who was learning to navigate his wheelchair with determined grace. He was teaching Lily, who'd been reunited with them, how to make paper airplanes with magazine pages. You have 24 hours, Diego continued. After that, I start eliminating problems. The girl first, then the soldier, then your precious Marcus. Make the transfer, and I disappear forever. The line went dead, leaving Victoria staring at her phone in horror. $50 million would cripple her remaining assets, but she'd pay it gladly. The problem was Diego's promise to disappear forever. Men like him didn't honor such agreements. Victoria made a decision that terrified her. She couldn't trust Diego's word, which meant she needed to find another solution. But this time, she wouldn't. And innocent people will die if we don't stop him. As they planned their response, Victoria recorded a message on her phone. Words meant for Marcus, Jake, and Lily in case the worst happened. If something happens to me, she said into the camera, know that loving you all was the best thing I ever did. Marcus, your kindness saved my soul. Jake, your redemption inspired me. Lily, your resilience taught me courage. You're my real family now. She saved the message and prepared for what might be her final battle against the darkness that had consumed too many innocent lives. The final confrontation approaches, but Victoria knows that facing Diego means risking everything she's come to love. Victoria Sterling made her escape from Whitmore Hospital at 2 a.m. using a service elevator she'd memorized during her captivity. Her loyal assistant, Patricia Wong, waited in the parking garage with cash, untraceable phones, and a detailed plan they'd developed in whispered conversations. The FBI is setting up surveillance at all your properties, Patricia warned as they drove through Detroit's empty streets. Agent Park thinks Diego will make contact through your regular channels. But Victoria had studied Diego Rodriguez during their investigation. He was too smart to fall for obvious traps. Instead, she'd arranged something far more dangerous. A face-to-face meeting at the abandoned Packard plant, Detroit's most notorious ruin. Transfer the money first. Diego's voice crackled through the burner phone. And we meet. Try to bring backup, and your friends start dying immediately. Victoria made the transfer from her personal emergency fund, $50 million flowing, to a Cayman Islands account while FBI agents tracked every digital footprint. But the money was just bait for a much larger trap. At Detroit General Hospital, chaos erupted when nurses discovered Victoria missing. Marcus, despite his wheelchair, tried to leave and search for her until security restrained him. She's going to get herself killed, Marcus shouted at Detective Nash. You have to find her. Jake Sullivan, still recovering but determined to help, revealed crucial intelligence he'd gathered during captivity. Diego has an escape route through the old tunnel system under the Packard plant. He's planning to kill Victoria and disappear underground. Meanwhile, at Riverside Children's Home, a mysterious fire started in the administrative wing where Lily's files were stored. Social worker Maria Santos, now working with FBI agents, barely evacuated the children in time. This wasn't accidental, Agent Park told her team. Someone's destroying evidence. Diego's cleaning house before he runs. The Packard plant at midnight was a monument to decay, broken windows like dead eyes, rusted machinery scattered like bones. Victoria entered alone, as instructed, but she wasn't defenseless. Hidden beneath her coat was a GPS tracker, and sewn into her sleeve was a tiny camera streaming live to the FBI command center. Diego emerged from the shadows, flanked by 2 armed men. He looked older than his photos, worn down by months of running and hiding. "You came alone." "Smart woman," Diego said, his gun drawn but pointed downward. "Your money bought you this conversation. Now you're going to listen to my terms." "I'm listening," Victoria replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "You're going to publicly confess that you framed me for kidnapping. Clear my name, and I disappear forever. Refuse, and I kill everyone you care about, starting with that little girl." Victoria felt ice in her veins. Lily's at the children's home under protection. Diego's smile was cruel. "Check your phone." The message contained a photo of Lily being carried unconscious from the burning building by one of Diego's associates. "Children's Services thinks she's being taken to a safer facility. She'd be dead in an hour, unless you cooperate." What Diego didn't know was that the kidnapping was actually a FBI rescue operation. Agent Torres had infiltrated Diego's network weeks earlier, and the man carrying Lily was an undercover federal agent. But Victoria couldn't reveal this without compromising the operation. She had to play her part perfectly, even as her heart shattered with apparent helplessness. "What do you want me to say?" she asked. "That Marcus Thompson and Jake Sullivan were working with you to frame innocent businessmen. That you orchestrated the whole thing for publicity. Destroy their credibility, and I'll let them live." The choice was impossible. Betray the people she loved to save them, or refuse and watch Diego's revenge unfold. As FBI agents moved into position around the plant, Victoria realized this was her moment of truth. The final confrontation has begun, but Victoria must choose between saving lives and preserving the truth. Victoria's decision came from the depths of her soul. She looked Diego Rodriguez in the eyes and spoke with unwavering conviction. "I won't lie about innocent people to save myself. Do what you must." Diego's face twisted with rage. "You're choosing to die for strangers?" "They're not strangers," Victoria replied. "They're my family." Before Diego could react, Victoria activated the emergency signal hidden in her watch. FBI agents burst through every entrance of the abandoned plant simultaneously, but Diego was ready for betrayal. In the chaos of gunfire and shouting commands, he grabbed Victoria as a human shield. "I walk out of here, or she dies." Diego screamed, pressing his gun to Victoria's temple, but Victoria had one more card to play. During her captivity, she'd learned that desperation makes people careless. She deliberately stumbled, breaking Diego's grip just long enough for Agent Torres to take a clean shot. Diego fell, but not before firing wildly. Victoria collapsed, blood spreading across her white sweater from a bullet wound to her shoulder. Miles away, at Detroit General Hospital, Marcus received the news like a physical blow. "She did what?" He shouted at Detective Nash, who just explained Victoria's sacrifice. "She saved all of you," Nash replied grimly. "Diego's network is finished, but she's in surgery now." Jake Sullivan, despite his injuries, insisted on being wheeled to the surgical waiting room. "That woman saved my life twice," he told the nurses. "I'm not leaving until I know she's okay." But the worst discovery came when FBI agents raided Richard Cross's penthouse. They found detailed plans for eliminating Marcus, Jake, and Lily permanently. Richard had been planning to kill them all once Diego served his purpose. He was going to murder children, Agent Park told her team, reviewing Richard's files. His sociopathy runs deeper than we imagined. At the emergency room, Victoria was rushed into surgery while a crowd of unlikely allies gathered in the waiting room. Marcus in his wheelchair, Jake on crutches, little Lily holding Maria Santos' hand. Detective Nash, Sergeant Torres, and even some of Victoria's former employees who'd learned the truth about Richard's betrayal. Dr. Sarah Chun, miraculously awakened from her coma just hours earlier, insisted on consulting on Victoria's surgery despite her own injuries. She saved my life when she exposed Richard, Sarah explained to the puzzled medical staff. The surgery lasted 6 grueling hours. Victoria had lost massive amounts of blood, and the bullet had damaged crucial arteries. Twice her heart stopped, and twice the medical team fought to bring her back. In the waiting room, Marcus held Lily on his lap, both of them praying to whatever gods might listen. "She's going to be okay," Marcus whispered, as much to convince himself as to comfort the little girl. Jake Sullivan sat nearby, his phone buzzing, with updates about his daughter Emma, whose experimental treatment was finally showing promise. The money Richard had used to manipulate him was being redirected to help other families facing medical crisis. At 3 a.m., the surgeon finally emerged, exhaustion etched on his face. "She's alive," Dr. Martinez announced, but it was close. Very close. The relief was overwhelming. Marcus broke down crying for the first time since his mother's death. Jake fell to his knees in gratitude, and little Lily smiled for the first time in months, but their joy was tempered by reality. Victoria faced months of recovery. Richard Cross had escaped justice through suicide in his jail cell, and they all carried scars that would never fully heal. As dawn broke over Detroit, they gathered around Victoria's hospital bed, watching her breathe with the steady rhythm of life. She was unconscious but alive, having proven that love could triumph over evil when people chose courage over comfort. Victoria's sacrifice has saved them all, but the hardest journey, healing and rebuilding their lives, is just beginning. 6 months after the Packard plant confrontation, Detroit General Hospital had become a second home for an unlikely family. Victoria Sterling sat in her wheelchair beside Marcus Thompson's physical therapy session, both of them bearing the visible and invisible scars of their ordeal. "Push harder, Marcus," encouraged physical therapist Janet Williams. "Your upper body strength has improved tremendously." Marcus gritted his teeth, lifting weights that would have seemed impossible during his captivity. The months of malnutrition and abuse had left him weakened, but his determination burned stronger than ever. Yet some days, the depression overwhelmed him like a black tide. "I'm not the man you thought I was," Marcus told Victoria during one of their difficult conversations. "I'm broken, Victoria. Half a man in a wheelchair who can't even provide for it. At least now I know what love feels like, even if I can't offer you the life you deserve." Their relationship had evolved into something neither had expected, not the fairy tale romance Victoria had once dreamed of, but something deeper and more complicated. They were bound by trauma, guilt, and a love that felt both precious and painful. Dr. Sarah Chun worked with all 3 of them in group therapy sessions. Her own recovery from the head injury had been remarkable, though she now suffered from occasional seizures that ended her surgical career. "Trauma bonds can be as strong as love bonds," Dr. Chun explained during one session. "You've all been through experiences that most people can't comprehend. That creates both connection and conflict." Lily Rodriguez, now 8 years old and legally adopted by Victoria, displayed wisdom far beyond her years. She'd learned to speak again through art therapy, but her drawings revealed the depth of her psychological wounds. Pictures of burning buildings, men with guns, and hospital rooms filled her sketchbooks. "Sometimes I dream about the bad men coming back," Lily confided to Marcus during one of their afternoon sessions. She'd grown especially close to him, perhaps because they both understood physical vulnerability. "Me too, sweetheart," Marcus admitted, "but we're safe now, and we have each other." The financial reality was harsher than any of them had anticipated. Richard Cross's legal manipulations had destroyed much of Victoria's fortune. Legal fees, medical bills, and the cost of restoring money stolen from the Sterling Foundation left them living modestly in a small house near the hospital. Victoria struggled with the loss of her business empire almost as much as her physical injuries. "I used to control billion-dollar decisions," she told Marcus bitterly. "Now I can barely manage our grocery budget." Jake Sullivan visited regularly, bringing updates about his daughter Emma, whose cancer treatments were finally successful. But Jake carried his own burden of guilt that no amount of gratitude could erase. "I pointed a gun at you," Jake reminded Marcus during one particularly emotional conversation. "I threatened you because I was desperate. How do you forgive something like that? Because you chose to do the right thing when it mattered most," Marcus replied. "That's who you really are." The three adults had formed an unusual support system, taking turns caring for Lily and managing their shared trauma. Some days were better than others. Victoria's nightmares about Richard's attacks would wake the entire household. Marcus's phantom pain from his paralyzed legs would leave him unable to concentrate. Lily's selective mutism would return during stressful periods. But slowly, incrementally, they began building something new. Victoria used her remaining resources to establish the Thompson Foundation, named after Marcus, providing support for families facing medical and financial crises. Marcus studied law through online courses, planning to advocate for disabled individuals. Lily, through her art, began helping other traumatized children express their feelings. Their love wasn't the passionate romance of movies, but something more complex, a choice made daily to stay together despite pain, to build something meaningful from the wreckage of their former lives. They're learning that healing isn't about returning to who they were, but becoming who they're meant to be together. About 2 years after the confrontation, Dr. Sarah Chun's therapy office had become a sanctuary where 3 broken souls slowly learned to breathe again. The Wednesday afternoon sessions were no longer about survival. They were about learning to live. "I need to say something I've never admitted," Marcus began, his hands trembling as he gripped his wheelchair arms. "Sometimes I hate you, Victoria. I hate that your world destroyed mine. I hate that I can never be the man who deserves you." The words hung in the air like poison, but Dr. Chun had prepared them for this moment. Truth, even painful truth, was necessary for healing. Victoria's response came through tears. "And I resent you sometimes, Marcus. I resent that loving you cost me everything I built. My company, my independence, my sense of self. I gave up my entire identity to save you, and some days I wonder if it was worth it." Lily, now 10 years old, looked up from her drawing tablet. "I used to think it was my fault," she said quietly, "that if I hadn't been on the street that night, none of the bad things would have happened." Dr. Chun leaned forward. "And what do you think now, Lily?" "I think we all saved each other," the little girl replied with wisdom that amazed the adults. "Maybe we had to break before we could become a real family." The breakthrough came gradually. Marcus began seeing a specialist for phantom limb pain, finally addressing the physical trauma he'd been ignoring. Victoria enrolled in business courses, preparing to rebuild her career on her own terms rather than inherited wealth. Most importantly, they stopped trying to recreate their lives before the trauma and started building something entirely new. Victoria's foundation had helped over 300 families. Marcus had passed his paralegal certification and was working with disability rights organizations. Lily's art therapy program had expanded to serve children throughout Detroit. "We're not the same people who met that winter night," Victoria reflected during their final group session. "We're scarred, changed, sometimes broken, but we're also stronger than we ever imagined possible." Marcus reached over and took her hand. "I choose this," he said simply. "I choose us with all our pain and imperfection, not because it's easy, but because it's real. They've learned that true love isn't about perfection. It's about choosing each other through the darkness. 5 years after that fateful winter night, a small crowd gathered in the garden behind Detroit Community Center. The wedding was nothing like the lavish ceremony Victoria had once imagined. No designer dress, no orchestra, no society photographers. Instead, she wore a simple white sundress that accommodated her remaining mobility issues, and Marcus sat proudly in his wheelchair, wearing a navy suit Jake had helped him choose. Do you, Victoria Sterling, take Marcus Thompson to be your husband, in sickness and health, in wealth and poverty, through trauma and healing? I do, Victoria said, her voice steady and sure. I choose him every day. Lily, now 13 and radiant in her role as maid of honor, wiped away tears as she held Victoria's bouquet. Dr. Sarah Chun officiated the ceremony, her own scars visible but no longer defining her. Jake Sullivan stood as Marcus's best man, his daughter Emma beside him, healthy and strong. You may kiss the bride, Dr. Chun announced. The kiss was gentle, full of shared pain and hope, witnessed by the community they'd built together. Former factory workers, hospital staff, children from Lily's art program, and families helped by their foundation. At the reception, Marcus spoke to their guests. 5 years ago, I thought kindness would kill me. It nearly did. But I learned that love isn't about avoiding pain. It's about choosing to face it together. Victoria added, we don't promise you a perfect family, because we're not perfect people. We're scarred, struggling, sometimes difficult. But we're real, and we're here for each other. As evening fell, they visited the small memorial garden they'd created for Dr. Sarah Chun's original injuries, Jake's lost years, and all the people who hadn't survived their encounters with evil. They placed flowers and made their annual promise to honor those sacrifices by living fully. Lily drew a new picture that night, not of trauma or loss, but of a family around a dinner table, imperfect and beautiful. Above the drawing, she wrote, sometimes broken things, when put together, make the most beautiful art. Victoria touched Marcus's hand as they watched Lily work, and he squeezed back with the strength of a man who'd survived the impossible. Their love story didn't end with happily ever after. It continued with choosing each other every day, which was far more precious and real. In the distance, Detroit's skyline twinkled with promise, and 3 survivors who'd become a family faced tomorrow together, carrying their scars as proof of their courage and their love as evidence of hope.